This morning we are reading from 1 Corinthians 13. Hear these words of St. Paul. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. There are millions of songs written about it, billions of poems contemplating it, and an endless supply of movies exploring it. The it I'm referring to, of course, is love. Jesus' commands can be narrowed down to one simple phrase: love God and love your neighbor. And if one wonders who one's neighbor is, Jesus makes it clear that that includes those who are both easy and hard to love, those we like and dislike, and those we call friends and those we call enemies. We are to love them all. It is as simple as that. And yet, the command to love God and love neighbor is also the most complex thing to understand and to live out. After all, love does not always look the same. The way I love my mom, with whom I have a very close relationship, is going to be different than the way I love someone who is disagreeable, hateful, and rather mean to me, right? I mean, loving my mom looks like sitting next to her, eating ice cream, watching TV, and laughing. Loving the mean old lady down the street may at times simply mean not smacking her, then working up enough compassion in my heart to pray for her. Society is so desperately needy for love that we often misconstrue what love is, taking almost anything in the hope that we find love. And Christians are often leading the charge. There are many things that are misconstrued as love: abuse and manipulation, lust, neediness, codependency, simply a romantic or warm feeling in one's heart, enabling or being used, lack of self-care, and a whole lot of unhealthy things. Something that has taken me years to understand, and yet has become one of the most profound and important lessons of my life, is this: we are called to love boundlessly, but not love without boundaries. In other words, there's no end, no boundary to whom we should love and how much we should love them, but we have to set healthy boundaries in our lives, in our relationships, in order to be healthy with our time, with our energy. It would take me a year of Sundays to fully and accurately preach on love as Jesus taught us through the Bible. And to an extent, hopefully each week I am preaching on love of one kind or another. But since it's Valentine's weekend, I thought it would be a good idea this week and next week to read to you from this passage called the love passage, the one read at weddings, 1 Corinthians 13. If we could make this our standard for love, then we would be doing pretty darn good. So let's take some time this morning to go through this chapter line by line and see just what St. Paul had to say to the church at Corinth about this issue of love and what it should look like. First of all, in Greek, there are 3 different words used for love. There's eros, which is the romantic kind of love from which we get the word erotic. There is philos, meaning brotherly love, from which we get the name of the city Philadelphia, which we call the city of brotherly love. And then there is agape, which refers to the divine love, both the love that God has for us and the godly type of love that we are to have for one another. Agape is the highest form of love and is the form of love we are talking about today. So let's get into it. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. It's true, right? I mean, if you have these great gifts, but do not love others, then people see that. And they do not hear anything else you have to say. If you are not loving toward others, you can preach about Jesus till you're blue in the face, but no one is going to listen to anything you have to say. All they hear is judgment and condemnation. And it is this very legalistic, confrontational, belittling, name-calling, us versus them attitude that is seen in the church right now that has completely turned an entire generation off to faith and religion and church. When people with great gifts, preaching, healing, or whatever it may be, are greedy, selfish, abusive, or prideful, the world sees this hypocrisy and what were powerful gifts meant to be used to bring people to Christ are now being used to turn people away. I cannot tell you how many people tell me they do not go to church because of the gossip, greed, or mean-spiritedness shown by its members. Remember what Maya Angelou said. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. It doesn't matter how many scriptures you can quote, how many hours you spend at church, or how many PTA fundraisers you organize. If you don't do it with love, it doesn't mean anything. St. John put it this way, 1 John 4:16, God is love, and all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. God is love, the embodiment of love, the definition of love. If we do not have love, then it doesn't matter what gifts we have. If we do not have love, we do not have God. Love is patient. Love is kind. I know none of us struggle with either of those things. Patience and kindness are both fruits of the Spirit. They are gifts that we have all been given, but they come more easily for some, and they must be nurtured in all. As we were talking about the pillars of joy, we talked about compassion. Patience and kindness can be very hard sometimes, but when we nurture compassion, an ability to see others fully in their humanness as broken children of God, then patience and kindness come a little more easily. I know my mom loves it when I use her as an example, but she's an example of this, usually. She has Zoom meetings regularly with some people with very strong personalities. A couple of these people have extreme control issues. After the meetings, she'll call me and spout for a minute. But then she stops and she verbally recognizes that certain people have control issues. Those control issues usually go back to childhood trauma, rejection, or abuse. And the issues get worse when something's going on in their lives or they're not feeling well. So my mom will stop and think of how difficult it must be to deal with such a need for control and perfection constantly. And instead of being angry toward these people, she kind of feels bad for them. My mom goes from frustration to understanding to compassion. It makes it easier to deal with people that way. When we're right and we know we're right, and others won't listen to us, it's hard to be loving. Ephesians 4:15 tells us to speak the truth in love. But our emotions sometimes tell us to yell the truth in condemnation. That's not being patient or kind. Recognizing the brokenness in another and at the same time being humble enough to recognize the brokenness in oneself creates a sense of compassion, which leads to kindness and patience. Now, being loving does not mean that you allow people to abuse you, including verbally. Finding healthy boundaries and ways to respond is a lifelong process. Love does not envy. Now, there is a difference between envy and jealousy in the English language, as opposed to the chimpanzee language, I don't know. The English language, neither of which are loving. Envy refers to desiring what someone else has. When we desire what someone else has, we are usually not grateful or appreciative of what we have been given. And we often tend to get bitter toward the other person, often projecting characteristics onto them. We all do this. We start to think, oh, I bet he thinks he's so great because he has that nice house. What a snob. Then bitterness sets in. Envy can lead to bitterness, greed, lust, theft, lies, and a whole host of other sins. Jealousy is the fear of losing what you currently have. So maybe I have a friend named Kevin. Kevin gets a new friend, or worse, Kevin gets a girlfriend. I get jealous because I'm afraid of losing Kevin as a friend, or simply of not having as much of Kevin's time and attention as I once did, which will undoubtedly be the case in this example. Jealousy leads to the very same things that envy leads to. It's important to understand the distinction so that one can get deeper to the root of why one feels envious or jealous and to work at healing that brokenness. The Greek word translated here as envy means to burn with zeal. It means literally to be heated or to boil over with envy, hatred, or anger. Envy and jealousy are like pots of emotions kept on the burner, getting hotter and hotter until they boil over. By this definition, it is okay to like and admire what someone else has. It is okay to even think, oh man, I wish I had that new Ferrari, like your neighbor does. And it's okay to be sad or to grieve over the fact that you may be losing someone or something that's precious to you, such as someone's time or intimacy with a person. I may be wrong, but I do not believe that either of those things is sinful. Envy and jealousy become sinful when the other person or object or situation becomes an idol, building within us these other negative emotions. It becomes sinful when we're not happy for the other person to have what they have and we want to take it away. Love does not boast. It is not proud. Celebrating is a good thing to do. After all, Jesus' first miracle, recorded miracle, was at a wedding party. And Romans 12:15 tells us to rejoice with those who rejoice. Celebrating the successes in life is essential for happiness. That's why we have birthday parties and weddings and graduations. Sometimes the celebration is just that we were able to make it through the day without yelling at someone, or that we were able to make it to the gym, or that we finally started a new project. Celebrating invites others to celebrate too. And it thanks God for what God has done in and through you. Boasting, however, is when we put ourselves on a level higher than another. Boasting pushes on the buttons of the hurt or insecurity in others that leads to jealousy and envy. We boast because we want others to feel envious or jealous. In a sense, we want to cause others to sin. As one scholar said, the phrase "love does not boast" is the understanding that those who truly reflect biblical love do not think too highly of themselves, Romans 12:3. They do not have an inflated sense of importance or consider themselves to be superior to others. They are neither conceited nor arrogant. Boastful, conceited, vainglorious people, all translations of the Greek word used here, display a contempt, disregard, and scornfulness toward others. By contrast, those who choose biblical love treat others with concern, respect, and positive regard. Indeed, they esteem others better than themselves, Philippians 2:3. Boasting is a result of pridefulness, and it takes the focus away from God and what God has done and is doing, and puts it on oneself. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul said, God, said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for God's power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, says Paul, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. In other words, we can boast about God and all that God is doing in and through us, including the fruits that come as a result of our gifts. But the glory always belongs to God, not to ourselves. You can be pleased with a job well done, but remember that it is only because of God that you were able to accomplish what you did, and thank Him. All we have and all that we are belongs to God and is to be used for God's glory. Agape, godly love, recognizes that. Agape love puts God on the throne where God belongs and puts us on an equal level of worth with our neighbor. This chapter is very dense, and so it's going to take me more than 1 week to get through it. So we're going to stop here for this week. But this week, I want you to go home and to read this chapter, maybe several times, maybe from different versions of the Bible. It's not a long chapter. It's not a difficult chapter to read. And there's 3 things I want you to do. The first is to ask yourself, in regards to anything you think, say, or do, is this loving? If the answer is no, then you need to change what you're thinking, saying, or doing. I know lots of Christians who tell someone off and cuss them out and say, well, they deserved it because of how they treated me. I've never done that, of course. I even find myself doing that from time to time, to be truthful. Did they deserve it is not the right question. Is how I'm responding loving is the question. 2, check your heart, your intent. Be willing to recognize your own brokenness. You may realize that what you did or said wasn't for the reason you thought it was. Maybe it was because something was rubbing up against a broken place in your life, a hurt, a fear, or an insecurity. Maybe you were projecting your feelings or problems onto someone else. Maybe you didn't give someone the benefit of the doubt because you were offended at the ill will you assumed they meant, when ill will maybe wasn't even the intention. Maybe they were trying to tell you something in love and you need to be a little humble and listen. Check your heart. And 3, recognize how the other person is receiving what you're doing or saying. I have some very broken people in my life who take almost everything as an attack, and they get defensive and mean or sad and withdrawn. It's like walking on eggshells. But sometimes they are simply not able to hear some truth that I want to tell them. Or sometimes I'm not coming across how I want to. Sometimes I need to change my approach or how I speak to others in order to be able to talk to them. And sometimes I need to just shut up and let it go. I may have the best intentions, or think I do, but if my approach is brusque or sounds judgmental or condemning, then I'm not going to have the effect I need and want. I have to change my approach. Just a small note on that. Something I'll share with you that I learned. The sandwich method is always helpful. Putting the meat of what you want to say between 2 compliments. Because people will hear what you say first and then be left with what you say last, and somewhere in there what you say in between will kind of get into them without offense. For example, Kevin's not a real person, by the way, I should state that. Kevin, I love how much you love your wife. I just want to mention that you may not realize that sometimes you put her down in public, even if you don't mean to, and I think that affects her more than she lets on. I just wanted to tell you this because I know how much you love and care about her. Or, Sandy, thank you for taking this project on. It's such a help to me. I just want to encourage you to delegate the tasks so that everyone feels included. You are such a blessing to me. Try it this week. Maybe with your spouse or your parent or whomever. You might be surprised. You might get your way for the first time in a long time. So these 3 things this week are your homework. Asking yourself, is it loving? Checking your heart, your intent, recognizing your own brokenness, and noticing how the other person is receiving what you are doing or saying, and see if you need to change your approach. I look forward to next week when we will continue our discussion about what is love. Let us pray. Everlasting God, we can't thank you enough for who you are and for all that you do in and through us. We just give you all the glory and honor and praise and ask that you will truly teach us what it is to be more loving. That you will help us to put aside our own emotions and desires in order to truly love you and love others. So that we can lead people to Jesus. Because the world needs you as much now as it ever has. We praise you and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.